guys, it's Sam, and this is my October wrap-up and tome topple in October, because really I read fewer books this month because of tome topple, because I read 2 very large books. So I read 4 books in total, but before we get into it, let's talk about this video's sponsor, which is Book of the Month. You're probably familiar with Book of the Month already. It's a super popular and fast-growing book subscription service. Their mission is to promote new and emerging authors and connect people with books that they'll love. Their team vets a ton of different book selections and then gives you a curated list of books to choose from, so you don't have to spend as much time researching books that you might be interested in. Book of the Month is also risk-free. You can skip any month that you want, and you will not be charged for that month. And they do have the best price for new released hardcover fiction. You can get your first book for Book of the Month for $9.99 with the code COZY. They do only have US shipping at the moment, so if you're in the United States and you are interested, check out bookofthemonth.com. And this is the box that the books will come in every month, so let's see which one they put in this box for me. The rest are out in their big box. This is the Book of the Month blue box. And this one is stunning. This is the Keeper of Night. Just the tagline. Half British Reaper, half Japanese Shinigami. Ren Scarborough has been collecting souls in the London streets for centuries. This is like speaking to me completely. And she has to enter the Japanese underworld to serve the goddess of death. I have not heard about this, and I'm mad at y'all for not telling me. Then we have The Family by Naomi Krupitsky. And this sounds like a historical fiction following 2 women throughout their lives starting as girls. And both of them live next door and are best friends, but it seems like at least one of them's dad is in the family, which sounds like, is it the mafia? It looks like the mafia, right? I'm thinking. Then we have A Little Hope by Ethan Jola. And this is a little slice of life story set in Connecticut over the course of a year, following the intertwining lives of a dozen neighbors in this Connecticut town. Ooh, I've seen this one around a few times. This is How to Marry Keanu Reeves in 90 Days by K.M. Jackson, which sounds like a bunch of twists on some rom-com titles. Okay, not what I expected from the synopsis, but also like could be kind of funny. So this woman is a kind of distantly in love with Keanu Reeves, like a parasocial relationship thing, and she finds out he's getting married in 90 days, and she decides to like chase him around the country to convince him to actually marry her. And she wrangles her best friend into coming along with her and like helping, and he has a crush on her. So it's gonna be like a friends to lovers thing going on. Oh, and I was wondering, I was like, wait, there's more than 5 books in here. There's actually 2 add-ons this month as well. So first-time members can sign up for any book that they want, as well as pick the 2 add-ons. So those 2 books I will show you last. So the last book pick for this month is The Collective by Allison Galen. They usually have like a thriller or horror book, so this is probably their like scary book. Propulsive novel of psychological suspense. So the 2 add-ons that you would get to choose from are Will by Will Smith, which is the memoir of Will Smith, and then My Body by Emily Ratajkowski. And this is written by a woman who's an actor and a model, and is a profoundly personal exploration of feminism, sexuality, and power, of men's treatment of women, and women's rationalizations for accepting that treatment. So another more like non-fiction-y type pick. So that's all the book picks. I think I'm most excited for probably the first one. That one sounds right up my alley. The Keeper of Night. Yeah, definitely that whole like between life and death thing. You know, that's my jam. Definitely excited for that. So head to bookofthemonth.com, check out all their picks and pick one for your own. And if you want to get a book for $9.99, use code COZY. All right, now let's get into the books that I read in October. The first book that I finished was All the Feels by Olivia Dade. This is the second book in an adult contemporary romance companion series, so you don't have to have read the first one at all to read this one. This is centered around actors in a show that is very much like Game of Thrones and was sort of like inspired by Game of Thrones, so that in the first book especially, the author could kind of like rant about the like Game of Thrones experience and kind of use that as a backdrop for this romance. It was very cute. That was a spoiler alert, which I really enjoyed when I read it I think earlier this year or maybe last year. So this is another actor from the show, and this woman, what's been nice is that all of the love interests, all the female characters in here so far have been plus size. There are trigger warnings in here for mentions of domestic violence off page and not involving our main characters. This follows Alex and Lauren. Alex is the best friend of the guy in the first book, and he is very outspoken about how he isn't liking the direction that the show is going in, and so his the showrunners basically assign him a babysitter in the form of Lauren, who is related to one of the showrunners, doesn't have a very good relationship with the showrunner either, and it was basically like, you have to keep him under control because our like last season's about to air and he can't keep like acting up, basically. So she's assigned as his like minder, and they slowly end up forming this relationship bond. This series does a good job of having characters that are like multidimensional and interesting and like not typical either. Our main male character Alex has adult ADHD that is like very present on the page and very accurate of adult ADHD and what it looks like. And Lauren is described as like not being particularly like stereotypically pretty. So on one hand, it's really interesting to kind of sit with that experience when you're reading it. I might do another video about this or possibly like a Patreon post about this, talking more about this kind of phenomenon, because I'm somebody who's like doesn't look like the way a lot of romance leads are described. So I am more in line with like maybe like how Lauren is described. And there was still this like disconnect of like my brain being like, this is so weird to be reading. And like, he's supposed to be like so hot and she's so like normal to some perceive her as ugly. And like, how is he into her? And then I had to be like, wait, stop. And so it was like an interesting phenomenon that way, but it didn't get too heavy. It wasn't like the book was like making me do that, but it was just like an interesting thing to note that like we see normal people in books so infrequently, especially like romances and stuff. It's getting more popular, definitely, but it's just still not as like common. It's usually like she was beautiful, but she didn't know it. That it was kind of cool to see this. And also both of these characters in their late 30s. I believe Alex is 40 or like pushing 40. So it's just kind of cool to see like those kinds of characters. There are times in this this book in particular in the series that it's like a little bit heavy-handed with some things. Like Alex didn't necessarily read as a 40-year-old. I don't know if that's because of the depiction of ADHD, but like he just definitely didn't always feel his age. And then they lean very heavily into some of the fanfic stuff. So the first book is very focused on the fanfiction. Alex does dabble in the fanfiction. There's some like references there. There's a lot of references to pegging. And surprisingly, I'm just gonna let you know this, there's no pegging in the romance scenes. Not that I need there to be, but stop leaning so heavily into the pegging being discussed in the fanfiction world. But Alex being like obsessed with like pegging fic, and then not putting it in the actual book. I don't know. So there's like a few like just inconsistencies here that I was like, what? But overall, I really like these. I think they're really cute. They're really good exploration of sort of like fandom in like adult spaces, which I think is pretty interesting because a lot of fandom stories focus more on teens, and they're like obviously blatantly people in fandom that are adults. So enjoyed this, 3 stars. Kit's gonna join me in like 2.5 seconds. Next, we have the book that took me the longest this month to read and that I kind of knew. It was our book club pick for the House Salt Book Club, so I'll link that on the screen. We did our live show a few days ago, like a week ago, maybe by the time this comes out. And I don't think I'm gonna be doing a full dedicated review to this book. It's Dune by Frank Herbert. I don't know. I don't know if I really want to deal with fielding my comments potentially. If I do a full thing about this. I think most of you know by now what Dune is about because everyone has been reading it in preparation for the movie, which I do plan on watching probably before this video comes out. But this is the first installment in an adult science fiction fantasy series. It was written in the 60s. It's very influential for a lot of sci-fi and fantasy these days. This follows mostly our main characters of the Atreides family, who are a powerful family in, you know, the far future where we can space travel, and they are assigned to this new planet, or not like, it's a new planet for them, but it's been there a while. It's called Arrakis or Dune, and they know that it's kind of a trap and that the family that used to rule there is going to want to take back over, and so they are like getting started to go there. And Paul, their teenage child son, who is like arguably the main character, is sort of this like chosen one type character in this world. And so we're following the start of his journey also. There are triggers in here for pedophilia and rape that is off page, as well as fat phobia. A lot of fat phobic language, particularly with the villain. All this stuff is with the villain. This I did not enjoy, but probably not for the reasons that like a lot of people have talked about. I saw a lot before I even read this book that people were like, oh, it's so hard to understand and whatever. And I didn't really have that experience. But I found that it was very hard to connect to, and that was my experience and why I didn't really enjoy my reading experience so much. The first 2/3 aren't too bad for me. It was fine. It was sitting at about 3 stars, but the last third, there's a time jump, number one, and there's just like so much that like is very hard to connect to, and I don't really think the book did any of the pieces particularly well for current day context. Was this book groundbreaking at its time? Possibly. But reading it in 2021, having read a bunch of books that have probably taken some inspiration from it, having these be older tropes, and then also having the issues of how of its time in a lot of ways this book is, made it less enjoyable because there is like not a lot to connect to for me. So the world building, while this world is very cool, and I've ingested now a lot of Dune content related to like TikToks and things like that of people talking about Dune, because I was really interested like what makes people love this so much. Like I'm not quite seeing it, but a lot of the world building isn't necessarily explained on page. There are a lot of like appendices and like glossaries and stuff, and then people will constantly say like, well, you'll know more in later books, and I'm like, no, I should not have to read like the whole 6-book series or however long it is to like get some of these concepts that should have been explained in book 1. So we have that going on. We have very little character, not necessarily development, but like connections to characters, well fleshed out characters, the use of the characters, character arcs, any of that, like that is very non-existent. There were a few characters that I definitely liked more than others, but not enough to carry me through the rest of the story and to make me care. And then plot-wise, that is also very convoluted, not hard to understand, but kind of like, why did you take so long to tell me this plot in a lot of ways? So very meandering in a lot of ways. So there's like room that they could have put more, again, of that like character stuff or world building stuff or whatever, and it relies very heavily on some of like its themes, but even that doesn't carry it enough for me in my opinion. So ultimately I gave this 2 stars. Do I, like I said, understand that this was a groundbreaking novel for its time? Sure, but all the things I just mentioned, plus it having some issues with like the way it treats its female characters, the way that book 1 treats the sort of like white savior, the fact that like the chosen one character is a man and coming from like a society of like powerful women. There's a lot of things that like, I know a lot of people will be like, but you have to read the rest. You take books in their context, and people shouldn't have to read a whole series to like have the narrative say that some things are bad, you know? And I get that it's of its time, but maybe we move past it, you know? We can give it its credit where it's due, but we don't have to like put it on a pedestal, you know what I mean? So this is also why I don't plan on doing a more in-depth discussion of this. This is all I'm going to do, plus our live stream, which I have linked on the screen, like I said. But 2 stars. I will watch the movie, and I will probably highly enjoy the movie, and I will continue to consume Dune content via the movie form because I do think that movie is going to be great, and like that movie series is going to be really cool. Totally fine with that. Not going to be reading them. Then we moved from Dune into something that was highly enjoyable. This was technically the only book that I finished for Tome Topple. I was still reading Dune during the first part of Tome Topple, and then I finished this book during Tome Topple, and that is Harrow the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. This is the 2nd book in the Locked Tomb series, which is an adult sci-fi fantasy series as well. This is going to be a quartet, recently announced that it's going to be more than 3 books, which is exciting. This has triggers for lots of things. All the blood, gore, bones, body horror, whole thing. If you have problems with any of that, that's the whole series. There's also some like themes of possession in both books. And then there's some implied necrophilia kind of in here, not really on page. And I don't really know if that happened or not. And it's a very gray area because there's like necromancers and like alive dead, I don't know. So, but there's some like potential ick factor with that. But again, it's not like with our main characters, like POV stuff, but just know that that's out there. This picks up after the events of Gideon, so I cannot talk about a lot of it. What I will say is that this was a wild ride. This series is chaos, and I really enjoy it. The first book I really enjoyed, and I was not confused in the first book. If you were at all confused in the first book and maybe were like hesitant about continuing because you didn't really like the first book, just don't continue. You're probably not going to enjoy it. I really liked the first book, and so most of this book, the first 75% of this, you do not know fuck all of what's going on. It's intentionally confusing and it all comes together in the end, but if you didn't like the first book, you're gonna suffer through this. I was very much able to be like, I don't know what's happening, but there's bones and it's like cool and like cool shit's happening, sort of, but like I don't know what's happening. This one is definitely one that would probably benefit from like a reread closer to when the next book comes out. I don't know if I'll do that because it is still like very confusing when you're reading it. But I knew something smart was happening, like something was going to be expertly done, so I was fine with continuing. But again, if you didn't like the first book, you're not gonna like this. But I ended up really enjoying it. I enjoyed the ending, like when it all came together, very satisfying. I will be doing a full review and also discussion gush about this later on this month, so check that out for more of my in-depth thoughts on this. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars, which is the same rating I gave Gideon, but I would say I think Gideon might be a 5-star book now in retrospect, and that I liked Gideon slightly more just because this was a little bit confusing for a lot of it. But I still enjoyed it and can't wait for more. And the last book that I read was Payback Switch by Lana Harper. This book was my Bibliothecary book pick for the month, so every month my Bibliothecary supporters get to vote in a poll for a book that I will for sure read and review in some format that month. So this is a book that I just want to preface with, I wasn't necessarily expecting to read because I saw it on NetGalley before I received it in the mail. I didn't ask for it, and I usually don't like when publishers do that, but like this was a very pleasant surprise. I saw it on NetGalley and I was like, I'm not sure, because this is a adult contemporary fantasy romance. So more contemporary romance with fantasy. I know, but anyway, when I tend to see romance books that have like magic and like stuff in them, they are written in a lot of ways that are very like tongue-in-cheek kind of, and I just don't tend to like it. I've tried a couple of them and I just don't tend to like it. So I was like, I don't think so, even though this really appeals to me. And then I got on my door and then it was voted in the like book pick poll and I was like, okay, I have to read it. And I'm so glad that I did. Like I said, this is an adult romance with contemporary fantasy elements. So this follows our main character of Emmy, and she is a witch from this town in, of all places, Illinois, which is where I'm from and where I live. And it's sort of this like Salem in Illinois kind of thing where like there's some founding families and they all have magic, but she moved to Chicago, moved away 10 years ago because of this disastrous relationship with one of the other founding family members' sons, and she was like kind of ran away and hasn't been back. But now there's this sort of, I think it generationally happens, this sort of gauntlet that chooses the next ruling family. And the Blackmore family, which is the guy that she sort of like romanced years ago, his family has always sort of been the ruling family and always wins, and they're like highly overpowered. Well, she's coming back because her family are always the arbiters of this, and so they kind of like oversee the competition and don't participate because they're like the weaker witches, and she's coming back to kind of engage with that. But when she gets back, she realizes that that guy, still a douchebag, her best friend ended up falling for him, and he sort of double-crossed her, cheated on her with this other woman who is also in town, who's another one of the founding families like people. And Emmy ends up starting like a little thing with that other woman, Talia, who's also from like a necromancer type family. There's a lot to talk about here. I'm gonna be doing a full review. But this is super fun, and like the elements of the fantasy stuff is engaging also. I find again that a lot of like romance books that have this fantasy element, not fantasy romance, but like romance books with the fantasy, they like don't really go into the world building stuff at all, and like it's very much an aside, and again it just is like very weak. This was not. This is, the way I'm describing this is John Tucker Must Die, because they're all like kind of teaming up to like kind of take him down and like take the gauntlet situation from him. John Tucker Must Die meets the Tri-Wizard Tournament, set in a town that's a combination of Halloween Town and the vibes of the Ants House from Practical Magic. It is so good, with a sapphic romance between two bi women who are witches. It's so good. It's so cute. I just highly enjoyed it. Like everyone feels very fleshed out, and there's all these different kinds of magic. Like her best friend has this like nature magic, which you know I vibe with. The love interest has that like necromancer type dark magic. It's so like, and the setting is so completely fall. It's very much like a fall book. You could still read it in November, but like this was perfect for Halloween season. I read this the week of Halloween and it was perfect. Like all of the just like depictions of like orchards and witchy shops and like the competition, and it was just so good. So I really enjoyed this, and them as a couple, Emmy and Talia, are one of my favorite sapphic couples I've ever read about. I really enjoyed them. So ultimately gave this, I mean, the way I'm talking about it, maybe it should have been a 5 out of 5, but I gave it like 4 to 4.5 out of 5 stars. We'll see how I continue to sit with this. But really enjoyed this. Unfortunately, the next book in the series has a little bit more of like darker magic. I read a little excerpt in the back of this and I was like, I don't think I'll ever read that one. But maybe in future ones, if like they get away from the spooky, I will be able to read more of these because they're very cute and highly enjoyed it. So that is it for all of the books that I read in October. Comment below, let me know how your reading month for October went. Did you read some spooky books? Like, what happened for your reading month? Also, I should mention, I have been on TikTok for a while and I've just let some of you guys find me randomly just by chance. But now I'm doing like some book content on TikTok too. So if you want to see even more of me, I am now on every platform. Like doing Twitch, my Twitch and my TikTok are both thoughts on tomes _, you know, in addition to Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Join me in my empire. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye.